Hey everyone, this is Stren from XtremeRigs.net. Today I'm going to make a little video to show you how to do the Indigo Xtreme Reflow. For those of you who don't know, Indigo Xtreme is not a normal TIM. TIM stands for Thermal Interface Material. So instead of using a normal tube and squeezing out a little dollop of the material onto the heatsink, putting your, onto the chip, and then putting your heatsink on top, you have to do a little more complicated setup, and we're going to run through that today. So the first thing you're going to do is shut down your computer, and you're going to make sure that you've set it to stock. You don't want it to be overclocked while you're doing this. So stock frequencies, stock voltages, and that's important so that during reflow the computer doesn't overheat and crash. Otherwise you may interrupt the reflow, and it's just not ideal. So we haven't done that, but we're going to take a shortcut with that. So first off, let's remove the old block. Here we have a Bits Power Summit, which I used some MX2 because I have tons of it. MX2 is my normal testing TIM, so I'm just undoing the thumb screws here. These Bits Power thumb screws take a little longer than I'd like. Some of the blocks, like the CPU 380, which is currently my favorite block, and the Supremacy, only take about 6 or 7 turns, so that's kind of nice. I lose count with this one. Alright, nearly done. Come on. So if you haven't read my article about Indigo Xtreme and you don't know much about it, I would highly recommend you go read that. Because that tells you a lot about really what Indigo Xtreme is, why you should use it, or why you shouldn't use it. A lot of people are scared of it. For most people, you shouldn't be scared. If you're a water cooler, you've already done things which are much more dangerous. Alright, so there we go. So the water block's off. The tubing won't really let me show you, but you can see the old TIM on there, fairly standard. I'm going to try and put this block somewhere. It's always a good idea when you do this kind of stuff to turn your board fully off. So, where can this go? Trying to just find a spot where this isn't going to damage anything. Alright, that's kind of there. We'll have to move the camera so you can kind of see what I'm doing. So the next step in the process here, we have to get the top of the chip ready for the reflow procedure. So I'm just retightening these screws here so we're ready to go. So first I'll take a paper towel. A small section like this should do. And just fold it up into a little square and wipe the excess of the old TIM away. Depending how old your TIM is, as well as what type of TIM, this may be relatively easy, or it may be relatively dry and kind of caked up, and you may need some alcohol or something to do this part. Now I'm going to undo the socket. This is actually a little cheat and shortcut on the Rampage 4, at least. When you undo the socket, it notices and it thinks you've put a new chip in, and so we'll reset to stock settings in the BIOS anyway, which is a nice little shortcut, because who wants to go through the BIOS to reset the stock if you don't have to? So here I'm just trying to get the excess gunk around the lip of the chip just in case. And then after this, I would normally just wipe over the top once with some rubbing alcohol. You know, very pure alcohol you can buy from CVS or whatever, not drinking alcohol. You know, don't be using vodka to clean your block or your CPU. So, then we have to close this back up. So you tuck that one in. Then, once you've cleaned with the alcohol, I'm going to actually skip that step just for today because I'm out of alcohol. The next step is to use the Indigo Xtreme cleaner itself. This is a very powerful solvent which will get rid of any extra crap on the socket or the cooler. Don't forget you also have to do the bottom of your water block or heatsink if you are an air cooler. Indigo Xtreme is not just for water coolers. Everyone will see a difference. So, clean that off. Now, they don't just give you the cleaner, they also give you some lint-free wipes. Stuff like paper towel, you can often get little pieces of the paper towel that end up on there. For the Indigo Xtreme Reflow, you really want everything to be absolutely as clean as possible. So we're going to take our lint-free wipe, we're going to open up the solvent bottle, we're going to apply a little of the solvent to the cloth, and we're going to wipe everything down. Don't leave the top off the solvent bottle because this stuff evaporates so quickly that you won't have any left, and it's useful stuff to have around. Again, for this, it's useful to be wearing the supplied latex gloves, as again you're less likely to be getting grease from your hands all over everything. You'll see when you're doing this, the solvent just disappears right away. Make sure to do the same to your water block or heatsink, and then you should have a perfectly clean environment for the reflow. So the next part you want to do fairly quickly. You don't want to go off and make a coffee or something because dust is going to settle in there. So the next part is to apply what's called the ETI. The ETI, I forget what it stands for, but it's the little plastic thing that holds the actual tin itself. And this is what the reflow will occur under. So the orientation wise for the 3930K is going to be like this. The back of the board is here. So the graphics cards will be over here, and normally your drive bays will be that way. So you can see the thick part goes towards the graphics cards, and that means there's some cutouts here which cover the hole in the top of the IHS. Another important thing to remember while you're doing this is that the motherboard has to be horizontal. If you don't have the motherboard horizontal, then the TIM during reflow may not flow under the block. It might leak out because of gravity. So make sure that you rotate your case. If you've got a tower case, make sure you put it on its side. In fact, tower cases are a real pain for this. You can see as I'm doing this, I'm going around the edge and just pressing down and making sure. Basically, there's going to be some plastic that goes around the edge of the TIM, and that's designed to stop the metal flowing out the sides. So you want to make sure that's sealed well to the IHS of the heatsink. So you're just going around, pressing that And you want, you know, if you position this correctly, there should be a little gap all the way around the edge of the IHS that's covered by plastic that's stuck to it. Once you've stuck this part down and you're ready to apply your water block, you can then remove the top. You see that's just going to lift off. And in the center there is the bare IHS. And you can take your water block and mount it back on. Once at this stage, of course, now it's protected from dust. So you can be fairly slow after this point. But that was the critical part where you don't want to just be letting dust gather after you've cleaned it. So then we find the thumb nuts to tighten this thing back down. And on my website, for most of the current water blocks out there, I have mounting pressures that I had success with, that gave me good reflow. Indigo Xtreme isn't that sensitive to mounting pressure. Generally, I'd say you want a little less than you would with regular tin. Because the tin is so good, you don't need it to be as thin as possible. Instead, you're looking for what gives you the best reflow. And the reflow, it usually still works with extreme mounting pressure, but I feel like it's just a little better, or a little easier, I should say, a greater chance of success when you have a more moderate contact pressure. If you go too light, then there's not enough material and you'll end up with voids, so it won't be a complete coverage, so then your temperatures won't be quite as good. But as long as you have the majority of the center covered with the tin after it spreads, and you won't know that until you remove the block, you should have very good temperatures. So now I'm going to tighten the thumb nuts, and I'll do one turn at a time. I do it in a crosswise pattern. So this is just designed to make sure I'm applying even pressure. And if you don't do this, and I've actually marked the thumb nut so I know exactly when I've done a turn or not, because the ETI is not symmetrical in height before reflow, if you just go by the gauge of your feeling, then your block at the end is not going to be level. So this is just a way to make sure the pressure's even. And during reflow, you know, the block is going to balance itself out. You know, the springs will push the block down evenly, and as the tin melts, it's going to reseat itself. Actually closer on this top side where it was higher before. So with this Bits Power block, it's actually kind of convenient the way they've done it. You'll know when you get to the right mounting pressure because the thread that you're screwing these nuts onto, the end of that threaded nut, I suppose, well, not nut, whatever it's called, that threaded piece is going to come through the center of the nut, and when it's level with the top of the thumb nut, that is when you have enough mounting pressure. So hopefully, while I've been talking to you, I haven't screwed anything up here. That's always possible. I'm not good at talking and thinking at the same time. And with Indigo Xtreme, you want to make sure that you're thinking clearly, because it's pretty easy. You know, you have to pay attention while you're doing it, because you want to get it right. And, you know, it's not the cheapest stuff in the world. If you're talking a 2-pack for, I don't know, $25 or so, if I remember right. And a 2-pack is helpful, because if you've never done it before, you're probably going to need 2 shots, just because that's life. And if you're anything like me, you usually end up screwing things up at least once. So don't feel bad if you're like that too. So we've tightened them down, and I can just feel the screw thread is just right at the top, you know, the same height as the nut there. And for the summit, that is the correct mounting pressure that I found. Like I said, on my website I have a list of all the other blocks that I've done and the number of turns that each block needs on the thumb screws. So now we're going to turn the block, the whole computer on. And for now you're going to leave your pumps and your fans running and everything like that. So let's do that. I'm going to move the camera so that we can see the monitor. Let's zoom out a bit there. Okay. So we'll leave that there. And we'll tilt that down a bit so that reflection is not as annoying. Alright. So when you first turn on, you may have a cable stuck in your fan, but apart from that, you may have some problems booting the first time, because right now you have incredibly poor contact. Let's turn the monitor on. You have incredibly poor contact on, you know, between the CPU and the heatsink. So your CPU may overheat during boot. You can see this time we booted just fine in the past, particularly if you haven't set your clocks back to stock. You may not even get to the BIOS, and you may have to spend 10 minutes trying to boot and boot and boot and boot until you finally get in. So if that's happened, don't worry, you haven't killed your system, it's just having difficulty. And we are going to select a stock BIOS setting that I have, load from profile 2, and quit. So we just loaded a stock BIOS setting, and we're going to boot to Windows, and then we're going to show the reflow procedure, and that'll be it. So this test rig, it runs from a hard drive, not an SSD. This is my general review and testing PC, so it doesn't get the best hardware. Well, that's not true. It has a 3930K and a Rampage 4 Xtreme, but the other hardware is kind of bits and pieces left over from other projects. So the boot is a little slow. Come on, Windows. So during reflow, what happens is that we're actually going to be turning off the pump and the fans, and you're letting the CPU melt the TIM. The TIM is what's called a phase change alloy. It's basically a metal with a very low melting point, and that is going to melt. The CPU is going to melt it, and that means the CPU has to get hot, and then that liquid metal is going to flow, and through capillary action it's going to move between the CPU block and the CPU itself, and because you cleaned it well, it should form a good contact between the two, and that's why you get one of the best thermal contacts that you can get. So the easiest way to do this is to use speed fan. I also like to have real temp running because it also gives me more confidence, and it also tells me when the CPU is throttling, which is kind of nice to know. So if you go to the charts tab on your speed fan and select the cores, you'll see here we're idling at about 48 to 50 degrees centigrade, which for idling at 3.2 gigahertz is absolutely rubbish. But that's to be expected. We haven't reflowed the TIM yet. The thermal contact is really poor. That's okay. So we're going to open a burn program. For this I'm using Prime 95. Doesn't really matter what kind of torture test you run. Just run anything. But don't start it yet. What we're going to do, I'm going to turn these fans off just so that we don't have any kind of cooling, because we want that thermal paste to get hot and melt. Not thermal paste, it's the phase change alloy, you know what I'm saying. So I've disconnected the pump and we'll see the temperature start to rise. As you can see on this graph, we're starting to go up a little. We haven't started the burn test yet. So now go ahead and start the burn test and you'll see the temperatures immediately shoot up. See, now the plot has zoomed out. We're 78, 80. We're still at 3.2 gig. Any second now, thermal throttling is going to occur. So now we're at 90, and now the frequency is going down. We're at 2.22. And here you see we go up to a peak, and then the temperature suddenly dip. You see this huge, well, not huge dip, but it's about 10 degrees C on this block and CPU combo. You'll see it dip, and the throttling stops. It goes back to 3.2 gigahertz. That means that the reflow is started. Suddenly you've got a lot better thermal contact. Now, because there's no pump running, the water block is still heating up from the CPU temperature. So at some point, you can see the temperatures are still rising because you're still applying heat and the heat isn't getting out. Once these temperatures get back up to a point where you're throttling, you can see we're nearly there now. We just started throttling. You can shut down your burn program. So we stop that, and the temperatures drop here because you've stopped the CPU from being loaded. But your CPU temperatures are still pretty bad. You're at 78, 75 because your water block is still hot. You're not running water through it. The pump is turned off. And so you only have passive heat dissipation right now. So you can see temperatures are still dropping a little, and that's fine. The critical thing with Indigo Xtreme to get a good reflow is not cooling too quickly at this point. At this point, do not turn your fans back on, do not turn your pump back on, otherwise you will cool the phase change alloy too quickly, and instead of slowly cooling into one single phase, you'll end up with multiple phases. And that means a poor thermal contact. So this does not appear to be focusing that well. But I wanted to zoom in and show you the kind of, this is the signature pattern that you'll expect to see. As you start the burn, it shoots up, and then it's going to dip, and it's going to slowly climb back until you start throttling. When it starts throttling again, you shut off, and then you'll see some passive cooling. And then you're going to shut the computer down. So we're going to shut it down, and note that we haven't turned on the fans or the pump. You're just going to let it passively cool. And you're going to let it sit there for about 30 minutes. Now that classic Indigo Xtreme reflow shape that we saw on speed fan, the speed that happens at depends on the block. With water blocks, it will happen a lot faster than air cooling blocks because a normal air-cooled heatsink has a lot more thermal mass. It takes a lot longer for the CPU to be able to heat it up to the same heat as, for example, a water block would be. because air-cooled heatsinks have a lot of passive cooling. You know, without fans, they still can dissipate a certain amount of heat. And the same thing with water blocks. Water blocks with a higher thermal mass take longer for that reflow to occur. So don't get panicked. On this system, you know, it took about 10 seconds for the reflow to start. On some water blocks, like full copper, heavy water blocks like the Danger Den M6 block or the XSPC Raystorm full copper, or the the EK full copper or full nickel blocks, they will all be pretty slow. They'll be 30 seconds, typically maybe as much as a minute before reflow starts. The critical thing is don't panic. Let it run, let it throttle, keep running it until you see that dip. And in that dip, the throttling should stop. One thing that is normal, some people always say, oh, I have some of the TIM came out of the side. To a certain extent, that's normal. I'm going to take this off the tripod just so you can see, or maybe see. It is very normal. You see it down there. Well, no, we can't see anything there. But it is very normal on this side of the block, because the TIM starts, it's spread out on this side, and it's supposed to run towards this side. It's very normal for you to get some small balls of it just squeezed out at the edge of the block here. That's totally normal. However, it shouldn't go any further than that. If you have balls rolling around or going in the socket, those are bad things. If you've applied the ETI properly, then you shouldn't have it even able to get into the socket. So, with all things like this, take your time, do a dry run before you commit to anything, and you should be fine. With this method, I'm sure when I power this back up that we're going to have great temperatures and everything will be great. So, like I said, let this cool passively for about 30 minutes, just to completely cool very slowly, and at that point you should have a single phase for the alloy under here, and you should have a very good thermal connection and better temperatures than you should be able to get with regular TIMs. So that's it for now. I'll be back in 30 minutes to turn this on, and that's it for now. Hey everyone, so this is actually the next day, and obviously by now the reflow will have cooled, so we're just going to boot up. We're going to go into the BIOS, we're going to load our overclock profile, and then we're just going to take a brief look at the temperatures on the CPU, and that's going to be the end of the video. Feel free to post any questions you have in the comments below or at my website, or you can always ask on the forums too. There's plenty of forums that deal with overclocking and stuff like that. So yeah, so here I am in the BIOS, and I'm just going to load my saved profile. I'm going to reboot. Probably turn these other fans on. And in fact also plug the pump back on. That would be a good thing to do. Yep, okay. I can feel that's running. I have a D5 running the loop right now, and I turned it down to setting 1 for some noise testing, and now I can't even tell if the damn thing's on or not. So that's the good and the bad. temp. Make sure we are overclocked, yeah, 4.7. And we're idling here between 30 to 34-ish degrees centigrade. I'll just check the ambience for a second. Find my thermometer. Which I count. Oh, here it is. So, let's see. You see that? Well, to me that's about 19, maybe 20 degrees C. So, you know, could be a little better, honestly. But this isn't the best CP block, or the best radiator, or high-speed fans or anything like that. So, just launch a prime and see where we're at. So just hit a blend. Here you see 4.7 gigahertz, 1.45 volts, and we're running between, the cores are running between 48 to 60 degrees, which is pretty good. Just going to bring the camera in here so you can see that. So there we go. So that's the end of the video. See, it's jumped up a couple of degrees. I guess the coolant is warming up. So I would say this is pretty successful. It's about where I'd expect things. So that's it. Let me know if you have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos from me. And also like my Facebook page. So that's it for now.